At a wedding last night, a bridesmaid rambled on into a 15-minute speech about her own bipolar disorder and eventually had to be awkwardly stopped. What's the most painful wedding speech incident you've ever witnessed? My wife's aunt was wasted at my sister-in-law's wedding and began a toast talking about the bride and her husband. After about 20 seconds she started talking about her dead parents and her failed relationships. She later tried, awkwardly, to have a friend of the groom dance and dip her, which resulted in him dropping her on the floor and walking away while she rolled on the floor showing her sequin underwear. At my sister's wedding, my alcoholic uncle went up and said a couple words. Them being, "I'm surprised you managed to have a successful wedding. How did this happen without your mom being the over-controlling bee that she is?" A silence like no other. If the mother is an over-controlling bee, then that was pure win. At my parents' wedding, the priest started with "We are gathered at this funeral today." The worst part is he started going on with the typical funeral speech until he was stopped. To be fair, he was well past retirement age. That's just hilarious though. At my brother-in-law's wedding, the grandmother of the bride was asked to say grace before the meal. My father and I happened to be standing by the bar after getting one last drink before it closed during the meal. We figured we would stand there during the 30 seconds or so while she blessed the food. She pulls out 3 pieces of paper, completely full front and back, and starts in on the history of the bride's family. Here is what so and so is doing now, when and where everyone has moved into their current homes. Updates on nieces, nephews, cousins' parents, grandparent, everyone. No one knew she was going to get up there and talk for 15+ minutes about people nobody cared about. My dad and I actually finished our drinks and ordered 2 more by the time she was done. I refer to it as the 3-drink grace. At my cousin's wedding, the priest made a long speech going on and on about how wonderful and responsible it was of the couple to get married once they got pregnant out of wedlock. Most of the bride's family did not yet know she was pregnant. Went to my uncle's wedding a while back. His bride had been divorced and chose her family pastor to officiate. The pastor called my uncle her ex-husband's name during the vows multiple times. My family was not happy. Same kinda thing happened at a friend's wedding. During his long, affectionate speech, the father of the bride kept saying the name of her ex repeatedly. Groom's father made a speech along the lines of, "We knew she was a keeper when he brought her home and we heard them fricking in the bathroom." Awkward. The groom's mother, who apparently has issues, faked an epileptic fit because the bride was getting too much attention. When my husband and I first started dating, he took me as his date to the wedding of a friend. During the reception, as the groom, my husband's friend, and his new bride was dancing to a nice romantic song, the DJ suddenly switched to "Sitting on the Dock of the Bay" by Otis Redding. This was the mid-1990s and the song was out of place considering the other music that had been played so far. As I watched the couple dance, I noticed that the wife had this look of disgust on her face, and her husband seemed to be pleading with her. He looked upset, but she looked pissed. I nudged my date and asked what was going on, and he told me that the song had a double meaning. Groom and bride broke up once and he hooked up with a girl on the dock of the bay. Tada. His friends knew about this, some sort of drunken encounter, and he confessed to his girlfriend when they got back together. His friends, using that term loosely, paid the DJ to play the song, which resulted in 1p off bride. Pretty tacky of his friends. I thought, you don't do that at someone's wedding. As a DJ who's done weddings, nobody requests anything without running it by the bride or groom first, ever. Not even if you tried to throw a $20 at me. I asked my dad to walk me down the aisle for my wedding. My dad, well, he's a bit of an odd fellow. Probably has Asperger's, very socially awkward, but he means well and his heart is in the right place. He was very proud to walk me down the aisle and wanted to make sure he did a good job. So he polled some married female friends of his to get their thoughts on their experience walking down the aisle. Most of them replied with some variation of, "Oh, there was so much going on and it all went by so fast. I don't remember too much about that part, actually." So my dad, bless his heart, took that to mean their biggest regret was not making the walking down the aisle part memorable. So he decided he would have to make me remember. All of this he explains to me, just as we're about to begin the procession. He says, "Don't worry, deep platypus. Just follow my instructions. And so we begin to proceed, and just as we near the rows and rows of people, he begins barking instructions. Look over here. Now look over there. Smile at this person. Commit this to your memory. Now look back to the left. Now the right. Slow the pace down. Now look to the front. Look at fiance. Smile at fiance, and so on and so forth. All the way down the aisle. Meanwhile, I'm trying to communicate to him through the smile plastered on my face. Yep, it's okay. I think I got it. And everyone watching was shooting us confused looks. Well, I guess it worked, cause it's not something I think I'll ever forget. I almost forgot this goodie in my receiving line at my wedding. This woman, who I have never met before, gave me a long depressing talk about how selfish it is not to get pregnant right away. Okay, great, enjoy the refreshments. I got this one nailed. Wedding in North Carolina. Father of the bride is also the pastor. Bride's sister is a recovering addict who has been clean long enough to be trusted to be a bridesmaid. Big mistake. Starts normal enough. Bridal party and bride and groom all up there, and pastor, father, starts talking. Then I notice bridesmaid sister slowly falling forward and catching herself a few times. Then she starts swaying even more. Pastor notices but keeps rolling. Swaying gets worse. Friend of the family gets up and goes to stand behind her to catch her in case she falls. At this point she decides it would be a good time to ask her mom, in front row, to borrow some money. She does so loudly. Mom and everyone else ignore her, but she asks again more loudly. It's clear by her speech she is lit. At this point the pastor pauses and asks her to be quiet. Wrong move. She begins to berate her father, the pastor using language not intended for church. The family friend standing behind her tries to lead her away, but she turns and slaps him. He picks her up caveman style over the shoulder and starts to walk out a nearby door while she is screaming. He walks through the doorway and she grabs the frame and holds eye. He breaks away, but not before the bridesmaid gets in a few more F-bombs. The pastor finishes like nothing happens. You heard me at North Carolina. My cousin married a Mormon boy a few years back. Our aunt officiated it and our entire family was so proud of her, and all loved the guy. The guy's mother though was very into her religion. Almost convinced the groom's entire side of the family not to go because my cousin had visible tattoos, but the groom and his brothers convinced her not to. At the wedding she broke into a toast that was not planned, nor requested, where she essentially said that she hoped that during my cousin's life she could look to the LDS church for truth and hopefully be able to ask God for forgiveness for her sins and be allowed into heaven. There was a very awkward silence afterward, with even most of her family looking embarrassed, but was broken by my aunt yelling out "We love you Libby," which prompted lots of cheers. The groom and some other cousins of mine promptly asked the mother to leave while others of us consoled the bride who was in tears. As an ex-Mormon, this is exactly what I am afraid of happening at my wedding. The matron of honor and best man were married, so they gave their speeches together and talked the whole time about their wedding marriage. The church wedding of an old friend of mine from university was held in a rather nice church in the middle of a smallish touristy town here in Germany, so the ceremony was somewhat not really private. There was a nice older lady making sure the few tourists didn't interfere. Anyway, half through the ceremony a middle-aged woman managed to get through, goes up front next to the couple and shouts, "I just wanted to ask what the church has to say about all these child suckers being discovered within the church recently." The groom has a great sense of humor and usually has good quick comebacks with even stronger wording. However, in this kind of situation I have no idea what he would do. It was his wedding and I know that he could also throw a good punch. Luckily the lady was escorted out rather quickly. Groom bride priest punches B in face. So sorry, but this isn't the church of child freaking. We're the bee punching ministry of righteous justice. Now gfo before I go next door and invite the congregation of the inappropriate wedding interrupters round for an uninvited tea lynch. I was in my close friend's wedding. As his bride-to-be was walking up the aisle, she face-planted. It was an outdoor wedding, so she got dirt grass stains all over her. Very awkward, but she played to really cool and didn't cry. Respect. I would have run away crying. I had one job. At my cousin's wedding, her boss got wasted and told a story about her nephew watching pee in a hotel on a family trip. It came out of nowhere and everyone was sufficiently confused and uncomfortable. I was young and someone had made the mistake of serving me wine, so I just laughed and laughed in the otherwise silent room. They had to turn off the mic and then just close the speeches for the rest of the night. At this point the best man should have taken the mic and said there should be a breathalyzer required to turn this thing on before continuing into his toast. So I was at my brother-in-law's wedding. My wife, groom's sister, was in the wedding party, so I sat with her family. Her parents get up on the stage to say their speech. Father-in-law steps up to the mic and says, "Thanks everyone for coming out," and sits back down beside me. There is a horrible awkward silence in the room. Everyone was expecting a long speech, and the MC had just sat down and taken a big drink. In the silence he leans over to me and says, "What? If you don't have anything nice to say?" Apparently he doesn't like his new daughter-in-law very much. At our wedding, wife's best friend grabs the mic to give a tipsy toast. After some nice comments about how happy she is for my wife, she proceeds to chronicle some of my wife's dating past. She includes a story about one very well-endowed Irish guy my wife dated. Turns out, my wife's friend misunderstood what the Irish curse really is. When my cousin got married, most of the close family knew that the groom had been caught cheating multiple times in the past, but the majority of the people attending did not. During a small speech discussing the marriage counseling he had done with the couple, the priest went on a long rant about the groom's past infidelity and how he was confident it would not happen again. Given how few people in the church knew about the issues, it became very tense. A friend was getting married, and the best man decided that in his toast he would try to compliment how beautiful the bride was. He ended up saying it took a team of bridesmaids and scientists to get her looking like that. Nice try, really awkward. A best man went into a discussion of specific high school wrestling moves and then commented on the instability of the bride and groom's relationship. Later, a bridesmaid mentioned to him that his speech was pretty awful. He thought the regular applause was an entertained audience. Nope, that was them encouraging him to be done. At my cousin's wedding this summer, the priest was giving his spiel and started to tell a story about my cousin's brother, Dale. My cousin doesn't have a brother and there is nobody in our family named Dale. TLDR. Who the frick is Dale? Only the priest can see Dale. Dale tells the priest to burn things. During the ceremony, one of the guests yelled out, "Groom, and I did so many drugs in college." It fell silent and my dad laughed for 5 minutes straight afterwards. Okay, honestly that's just funny as crap. My cousin was supposed to get married 3 months before us, but wound up having her wedding 9 months after us instead, postponing it a full year. My dad and my aunt, his sister, are not close. So I only got a piece of the story secondhand, that there were issues with the groom and they were worked out somehow. During their reception, the best man starts his toast talking about how wonderful and amazing the bride, my cousin, is, and how lucky the groom, the douche, is to have her. He then goes on to detail the drug use and infidelity that caused them to postpone a year earlier, summing up that thank goodness cousin stood by douche through those hard times. Those days are over now. My poor, sweet, shy cousin. Sadly it does not end well. Fast forward about 4 years and she and their 2 children moved back in with my aunt. Douche had sold off all the baby supplies. They had a newborn, so he could buy drugs. Oh my. At my father's wedding to his new wife, he mistakenly called his bride by his ex-wife's, my mother's, name during his speech to her. Take the Rachel. At my wedding my gay friend from high school got super drunk and stepped up to the mic. It was a low-key weekend. It took everyone about a minute to realize he was slowly professing his love to me. My sister had to walk him off the stage. This speech was literally going nowhere other than to tell me he loved me. Not that there is anything wrong with that, but to my defense I was currently occupied marrying my wife. Later in the night he tried to tell me I ruined his day by not having him in the wedding. We hadn't really hung out in the last 2 years, but more a wedding logistics issue. I told him his options were to have my brother walk him back to the room or I'd knock him out for trying to get in my face at my wedding. We chalked it all off to booze and emotions and are still good friends, but it was one of the best awkwardest moments anyone has ever experienced. I don't care if someone is gay or straight, there is a lot wrong with confessing your love for the groom in the middle of his wedding. My entire wedding was a painful incident. Groom was drunk and thought we were rehearsing for some reason. Proceeded to act like an butt and make jokes throughout the whole thing. After we were pronounced man and wife, he and all of his drunken groomsmen dogpiled me. Every sober person in attendance was horrified and several people told me I should cut my losses and plan the divorce. It was awful. Someone was kind enough to take a picture so I could remember the moment. There is a tradition in some circles where the best man's speech roasts the groom. A well done roast follows a cycle of build him up and knock him down. But I was at a wedding where the best man just basically insulted the groom for 10-15 minutes. After the first couple minutes, the discomfort in the audience was palpable. The laughs turned into polite chuckles and then into just silence. To make things worse, he had printed out his speech using a ridiculously tiny font and kept losing his place. By the time the fourth or fifth pause came around, someone actually shouted out, "Just say cheers and shut up already." But sadly the speech continued. I found out later that the groom was so pissed off by the whole thing that he didn't speak to the best man for several months after that. I've told this one before, but here you are. A couple years into one of my more serious relationships, my so and I were invited to his cousin's wedding, where a lot of both sides of his family would be, along with a few of our close friends. It was quite a nice ceremony, and afterwards we were conversing with the bride's stepdad. I was quietly nodding my head listening to my so and him talk, until I hear, "You know, insert X's name here, you're the one who should have married insert bride's name." I stand there, trying to close my mouth, and looking at this very drunk man telling my boyfriend to marrying his first cousin. Not only was this something I listened to once, but was loudly announced during his speech to the bride and groom. After all the speeches and dancing, the bride ended up getting pee drunk, being 5 months pregnant at the time, and telling everyone around who was not up and dancing to dance. Dance. It's my freaking wedding. Just lovely. They must be from a rural area. Drunk moms. Oh lordy, all the drunk moms. They all feel the need to grab the mic and hiccup and stumble over their words while their children look on in horror. I told my mum she's not allowed a sip till after the speeches are done. My brother was my best man and told a very touching story about when I was 16 and lied and cheated to skip baseball practice to instead hang out with my girlfriend on the bleachers. I met my wife when I was 18. Thanks, bro. Funny wedding 2 years ago. The minister took the opportunity to make a 45-minute sermon, said amen at times. He stressed over and over again that the bride will never have a will of her own again. She was just a rib to the man she was not bound to. Father of the bride then had his speech. He gave a long-winded telling of the disgruntled ex-co-worker's shooting spree in the hospital. He told about his wife locking the door and hiding. He gave coroner's reports of where people were shot and how one person that had been shot in the head had played possum. Then called the police. The father of the bride wasn't even there, but this shootout seemed to be the best thing that ever happened to him. He just showed way too much enthusiasm. Then to finish, he mentioned that the groom was the extra security hired after the incident and met his phlebotomist daughter. Then the testimonials began. Everyone shared stories about how hard the groom tried, but he was stupid. The stories of the bride were always about her eating problem. Can you believe she ate the whole pie at 6 years old? However, the bulk was, "It will get worse. Just get stronger with Jesus." Nobody shared stories of growing together and the adventure of raising a family. Nope. None of that. Life is over as you do your duty. It was like a eulogy. I think we just found the answer to the question of why people bug newlyweds to hurry and have kids. At my sister's best friend's wedding, the parents of the bride got up and did a lovely short speech, welcoming the groom into their family. And then the groom's parents stood up and talked for nearly 15 minutes about how awesome their son is, never once mentioning his new wife or the wedding or anything. It was super awkward. This was at my cousin's wedding. My cousin and his buddy had a pact, if you will. They would be each other's best men. Okay, all well and good. Only catch is during their toast they had to moon the reception at the end of the speech. So back to cousin's wedding. He is giving his speech. Yada yada, known this guy forever. Then at the very end he is about to pass the mic back. Oh wait, almost forgot, sets the mic down. turns around, stands on a chair and moons the wedding reception. Bride's family promptly left. I think my cousin forgot all about that because he looked blindsided. Luckily my side of the family found it hilarious. I have several from my sister's wedding. Nothing huge, just little things said by my brother-in-law's stepmom. 1. As my sister was putting her dress on, stepmom looks at her and says, "Does that even fit?" Incredibly rude, especially since it was a form-fitting dress. My sister looked very nice in it. 2. It was an outdoor wedding, and as such weather is always a concern. While we were setting up, it started, barely, sprinkling. It looked brief, so we didn't want to tell my sister lest she start to worry. Then comes stepmom to save the day. "It's freaking pouring out, thanks, Cherry." The rest of the night she was just a general wet blanket, and I think they left early. My sister had a great wedding though, despite her. At my cousin's wedding, some elderly relative of theirs gave a speech against shacking up. I guess she was oblivious to the fact that my cousin and her new husband had been living together for a year and that her brother was unmarried with a kid on the way. It was a very awkward 8 minuets. My Phil, most socially awkward and inappropriate person I have ever met, decided to give a speech randomly at his daughter's wedding. It was a very casual wedding and no one was giving speeches or toasts or anything. My sister-in-law was marrying a guy named Jameson, and this pretty much sums up his speech. Did you ever hear about how Jameson got his name? Well, his parents named him Jay and were so happy to have a son that everywhere they went they said, "This is Jay, my son. This is Jay, my son," which eventually got shortened to the name Jameson and cue the crickets. He then asked if Jameson's dad wanted to give a speech. It was totally random, out of place, and obviously awkward. He basically interrupted an entire party to tell everyone his lame joke. I was at a wedding this summer, and the best man started his speech by declaring that he didn't prepare anything because he wanted to speak from the heart. He talked for 5 minutes about how both his mother and groom's mother were dead, just going on and on about it. At the end of the speech someone at the reception audibly said he should have prepared something, which was met with a not so silent wave of agreement. The last wedding I attended, as a favor for a friend, was all kinds of weird. First of all, the wedding party walked down the aisle to a waltz in a minor key. Then, the groom started mouthing gibberish during the bride's vows, causing her to mess up and have to start over again. The pastor was like, "Shall we try this again?" The groom found this hilarious. Later, at the reception, the groomsmen each tried to outsuck each other with their speeches. One of them actually said, "The groom isn't the most exciting guy in the world, but if you're looking for someone to hang out with and do nothing all day, he's your man." The best man took the cake, though, with accusing the bride of stealing his best friend from him. The cherry on top was a complete lack of dancing at the reception except for the groom and groomsmen all going crazy when Wild Wild West by Will Smith came on. They danced on each other, each of them rapping the entire song, and sat down immediately after it was over. TLDR, depressing music. Groom pranks bride, insulting the groom and bride in speeches. White guy love fest to Wild Wild West. The only awkward one I've experienced was at my sister's wedding, where I was her maid of honor. The best man was the groom's brother, who had lived with them and a few other roommates at one point. He proceeded to tell some sort of odd, rambling story about my sister nagging his brother, complete with a me voice to represent her. It was meant to be joking, but it just fell pretty flat and seemed kinda mean, even if it wasn't meant that way. I felt bad, so I dropped a few of my, much more appropriate, jokes because I thought he'd done more than enough damage. The mother of the groom stood up with the single women and positioned herself directly behind the bride. She caught the bouquet. Her husband had died 6 months earlier. I went to 2 family weddings in the space of 6 months, both Ukrainian Orthodox. They had the same priest at both weddings, and he gave the exact same 45-minute sermon at both weddings. For the most part, the Orthodox churches vary by the book. I wouldn't be surprised if it was the exact same words for every single wedding. My sister and her hubby got married almost 6 years ago. The best man was hubby's cousin. BM was so drunk high that he could barely speak, let alone read the speech that he had written. He stood, swaying for 10 minutes before his brother took him outside, where he promptly threw up and passed out in the parking lot. My sister-in-law is batshit crazy. Let me start there and I'll get to the wedding part. It started several months before, when my husband proposed. It coincidentally was also his sister's birthday. She wound up coming up to our house and staying over that same evening, wanting to go out to the bar my husband frequented because she wanted to frick one, or a couple, who knows, of his friends, rather than us going out to celebrate our engagement. It turned into a birthday party. A few weeks later, hurricane came and she and her new third in a month boyfriend and one of her kids stayed at our house for over a week. At this point I think she decided she was entitled to stay whenever she liked. Fast forward again to 2 days before the wedding. She calls my husband wanting us to let her stay at our house during our honeymoon so she could have a free place to frick her boyfriend since she spent all her money on his plane ticket and couldn't afford a hotel. We didn't even invite him. It was a tiny, immediate family only wedding. Without asking, she flew him down and decided it was our responsibility to house her for the wedding, even though the wedding was 3 hours away from our house, on the beach. When husband told her frick no strangers are staying in our house with our stuff for a week while we aren't there, and our house isn't a free fuck, but she went ballistic. She ranted that she was going to crash our wedding anyway and frick up the ceremony, since what were we gonna do about it since it was on a public beach. She harassed us for 2 days via text. She told me I was a whale in a wedding dress the night before my wedding. She told my husband's father, her stepdad, lies about my husband while my Phil was on his deathbed. She calls my husband crying at Christmas, and he now just laughs. She apologized again at our nephew's wedding, but frick that crazy C. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.